Peace. Yeah, we back. Yeah, it's just going so hard. We was just draining the energy. So had to get that charger re-up. But yeah, so just going in about, we were continuing to go in about the how the Moorish Mississippian man was able to lead in the old Moorish Barbary states of America. And the last time the Moorish Mississippian man was a don, was really at a high authoritative status internationally, not just in America, but internationally, was under the Moorish demonstration. So that's the big reason why there's so much vitriol and so much hatred and literally a lot of money and finance to write the Moors off. And honestly, this is one thing you got to understand. This is just how much hatred the entire world has for the Asiatic American Moorish Mississippian man and the Moorish Mississippian woman by default, but mainly the Moorish Mississippian man. You know what I'm saying? Even to the point to where you got lame and you got weak Moorish Mississippian men themselves. They literally are just afraid of, it's like they're afraid of power, so they want to claim everything but being a Moor. You know what I'm saying? Because again, deep down inherently, understand, the brothers know that once you take that shahada, you take that oath, you got to get out here and get it. You know what I'm saying? You got to hold the line. And everybody in their DNA knows how gangster that used to be. They knew how bloody, how real it used to be. You know what I'm saying? Like when we were really out there. I mean, we've been off the chessboard for so long, and people have gotten so complacent and used to just being under policy management. So they don't have any, you know what I mean? They don't manage their own lives, and they're okay with it. They've been reduced to being children, the minorities. You know what I'm saying? But you know, what we're just, again, unlocking the mysteries. We're just going to drive it home and bring it back home that how in old America, you had two separate jurisdictions, particularly after the War of 18. I mean, particularly after the Revolutionary War and the creation of the United States, because a lot of our political situations descend from that era. So I spent a lot of time in drops dealing with that particular era of the post-United States America. You know what I'm saying? So you've always had the two jurisdictions. Now, when you get a lot of rewritten history, they're always going to write it from a European perspective, because first of all, again, there was a whole different history, a whole separate jurisdiction, and a whole different language that existed in America. There was literally two. Just like they've always said, there's two Americas. There's black, so-called fake black America, and so-called fake white America. You know what I'm saying? That's always to a degree been the case. You know what I'm saying? But back in the day, it was different nationalities and different designations. You know what I'm saying? So there's literally in the commie schools, they're going to give you this European history from the viewpoint and vantage point of so-called settlers. Now understand, for a settler, for a person who's so-called a settler, literally these people saw the entire continental United States, continental America as a frontier. They literally had never been as far west as the Appalachian Mountains before the 1700s. The vast majority of them. So if they're literally giving us the history based on what these people are telling us, how the hell? I mean, these people only spoke one language. They only spoke the modern version of English. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty much all they understand. But they wouldn't be able to really decipher the history of the rest of the nation and what was really going on. You know what I'm saying? Because they don't speak any of the old languages. They don't understand any of the old religions. These people were frontiersmen and settlers, and they only came, and especially in the early times, they were only going as far as the army, the so-called United States Army, was going. You know what I'm saying? So these people were trickling out onto the land especially around after the War of 1812. That's really when they really were able to even get the rights to even travel like that. You know what I'm saying? So we're given this history. But we got to understand, when they're talking about slaves and plantations and that type of history, and and their gradual advancement, across the country, that's just what they were seeing. I mean, that's from their perspective. There was a whole different jurisdiction. There was thousands of other Moorish towns that we were living in free. I mean, free as a bird. I mean, we literally had our own languages. We had our own jurisdictions. We had everything. There was a whole different history of the United States that these people are not telling us about. And understand, that other piece of history, the Moorish jurisdictions in America, they were everywhere. They were coast to coast, literally coast to coast. These jurisdictions were led by by vast majority. These jurisdictions and these towns and these cities and these districts and these areas, they were led by Moorish Mississippian men, the sheiks. And the hatred is so great for the Moorish Mississippian men, you know what I'm saying, who literally led this whole other jurisdiction in America, all the way up and pretty much until 1865. You know what I'm saying? Literally, the hatred is so great for the Moorish Mississippian man that they literally wrote this entire Moorish jurisdiction in America out of history and rewrote it as fake Native American, fake Indian, fake black slave, fake, I mean, just a hodgepodge of gumbo of bullshit. You know what I'm saying? They rewrote it as a fake history from a perspective of a damn near caveman. You know what I'm saying? It's just literally insane. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that we really ride around, you literally got these people who call themselves scholars and college educated people who really, the fact that they really run with their history, you know what I'm saying? And they really think that's real history. It's no wonder that, because again, the people in power who run a lot of this stuff, they know what's up. It's no wonder that these people are treated as second class and third class citizens, and they're supposed to be, and they're under public policy, and they're supposed to have their lives managed. Because if you believe that type of stuff, man, literally, I got like a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, we're gonna talk about the Southern Creek Wars, the Barbary Wars, and why they were referred to as the Negro Wars, and how much power the Mississippi and Moorish men had in the old South, in the old Barbary states, which is the old Southern states, the old Barbary, the Southern Barbary jurisdiction, and all across the whole Midwest Confederacy, all of that. So we're gonna talk about the Southern Creek Wars and why they called them the Negro Wars. So now, one thing we want to stress is now you're gonna see if you go back and you do a lot of knowledge, you'll see paintings or you'll see old pictures of the so-called Seminoles in Florida. You're gonna see a lot of different phenotypes. You know what I'm saying? Don't get it messed up. Like you're gonna see so-called Muslims that look like they may have the mestizo look. They may have the Pacific Islander look. You know, some of them may be extremely light skinned. You know what I'm saying? They may not be. Some of these people may not be, when you say phenotypically Mississippian, they may not look the part. You know what I'm saying? But understand. One thing has to be driven home is these people did exist within the Barbary states, and they were under our jurisdiction. But all of the main sheiks, all of the people who were doing international business, all of the sheiks of the towns, the majority of them, all of the days, all of the bays, all of the sharifs, all of the main guys, they were the Moorish Mississippian men, the phenotype of yours truly. You know what I'm saying? So when you see pictures of these people, and they may look phenotypically so-called, they may be Mexican looking Indians. You know what I'm saying? They may be these people, Mexican looking Muslims, or they have their Asiatic, Siberian, Hindu phenotype. These people were with us, or Turkish or whatever. These people were with us. You know what I'm saying? But understand, the bosses, the grand sheiks, the top dogs, the dons, they were the Mississippian men, always, in that whole jurisdiction. That was always the case. That's why in the South, they always would tell you in the Seminole Wars that they had to have so-called black Seminole interpreters. You know what I'm saying? Because only the brothers was always the bosses in that old Muslim demonstration in the South, in the Midwest and everything. It ain't no different from, it ain't no different from, literally it's the same setup. You might have so-called street gangs, Bloods, Crips, GDs, Vice Lords, even to this day. But you may have, and that's going to be a majority Asiatic so-called gang, you know what I'm saying? But you still may have people of other nationalities that may join these so-called gangs. You know what I'm saying? That's the same thing that was going on in the old Barbary states. You know what I'm saying? You had people of different phenotypes and nationalities that might have been clicked up with the Moorish Barbary states, but but understand who was still running the show. You know what I'm saying? It was always, that's why they call it the Negro Wars. They always made a distinction. They always made the distinction when they're talking about the wild Creeks, the wild rebel Creeks, the Red Sticks, the Southern Seminoles, whatever. They always made the distinction to say the so-called Negro Indians or the Negro Renegades or the Maroons. And they always said that they were the ones that was giving orders and running everything. And they were the troublemakers. They were the ones they were really after. Because they said when you got to the so-called Negro Indians or the Negro Maroons, everything else was going to fall apart. We had to get to them Negroes. This is a Negro war in the South. Because we was the bosses. It was the Muslim Mafia. It just is what it is. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. So, all right, so now we're going to talk about how one other thing is that we're going to show you how much power. This is where all the vitriol towards being Moors and Moorish Mississippian men comes from. One thing that if you do the knowledge to, even prior to the United States being formed, you do the knowledge to all of the so-called European powers that had to do business and do treaties with Morocco so their ships could be protected. Understand, Morocco was mainland North America, and we also had jurisdictions over in North Africa, all the way over to damn near to Turkey. You know what I'm saying? Like it was all moving as one. But the big dog again, the northern part, the Barbary coast of North Africa, so-called Morocco, so-called Tunis, Algiers, Egypt, all those places over there. Those places were just satellites of what was going on over here. You know what I'm saying? It was together, but those were like colonies to us because we did have a military presence over in those places. You know what I'm saying? But everything was going on over here. So it did say that France, Great Britain, and then when the United States was formed, they all had to do, a lot of the European powers had to do treaties with Morocco. And they said Morocco came up with something called, after they did a treaty with France, so-called France, for the protection of their shipping in the so-called Mediterranean, which is the Gulf of Mexico and the so-called Mediterranean over there. Don't get it messed up. You always have to read between the lines, these people, because these people will do anything to get away from the fact that the old Morocco was in America. You know what I'm saying? They will do anything to get away from that fact. They rewrite history, they write in code, they don't never want to tell you what's up. So it was interesting that it said that so-called France did a treaty with Morocco for protection in 1767. Britain and other European powers, they followed shortly after and did new treaties with Morocco for the protection of their shipping. You know what I'm saying? Because, we would seize people's ships and all in these waters because, again, we had the Moorish Navy all in these waters, all in the Gulf of Mexico, all in the Atlantic, all in the Mediterranean. We was deep. So they said that Morocco had something called the most favored nation clause that allowed a lot of European powers to do treaties with Morocco. Now, that right there should tell you right there that this is why they cannot stand Moorish Mississippian men, because they literally had to go to Moorish Mississippian sultans, you know what I'm saying, in America, bays of different territories and stuff like that, and deal with and request most favored nation status with us. You know what I'm saying? Literally with us. So that alone should tell you, your whole European nations were looking for most favored nation status with Morocco, who was ran by Moorish Mississippian men. You know what I'm saying? So that right there, that fact right there, literally puts all fake Aboriginals, fake Black Indians into little boy status. You know what I'm saying? Name one time, for all you Aboriginals out here who claim to be Aboriginals and fake federally recognized tribes and all that, for all you clowns, name one treaty that European powers back in the 1700s had to get most favored nation status with any of you Aboriginal nations. Show me one treaty. Just please, I'm looking for it. I'll wait. You know what I'm saying? Matter of fact, I might give a couple bands to an Aboriginal clown that can show me, you know what I'm saying, a most favored nation treaty. I mean, come on, man. So that just goes to show you that the Moors was the boss dogs in America. Everybody else was playing second fiddle. You know what I'm saying? That's why everybody hated. You feel me? So check it out. So we're gonna talk about the recruit. How the Moorish Mississippian men in the Creek Wars were rallying so many people to their cause, and that's why they were able to effectively engage the so-called United States for damn near 40 years. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. And we're just gonna talk about the Second Seminole War. So we're just taking these from articles, just doing research on the Second Seminole War. So from summer to winter of 1835, Black Seminole and Seminole leaders worked to recruit slaves in St. Augustine plantations and build up arms on the southwest Florida coast to resist removal. Then again, we already talked about how removal is just. It didn't mean anybody had to necessarily go anywhere. All it meant was the Barbary governments in set territory was supposed to essentially dissolve, And we were not supposed to be bagging up and bothering Europeans and snatching them up and taking them captive and all type of stuff. Because again, understand, there were two jurisdictions for the longest time, all the way through the 1800s, all the way up to 1865. There was the Moorish jurisdiction. We had free Moorish towns that were connected through trade networks, waterways, and everything. And we did our own thing. We had our own taxes. We had our own system. We had our own police. We had our own everything. You know what I'm saying? That is a whole history in America that is not talked about. So literally, the majority of you Mississippian people, listen, in the sound of my voice, the majority of your ancestors come from these free societies. You know what I'm saying? These free Moorish societies. You know what I'm saying? And they literally, since they wrote a lot of that out of history to force a lot of our people into these re-education schools after 1865 and all that, into these Christian re-education schools and these communist schools and stuff like that. They literally wrote that out of history and wrote you in history and rewrote you in history as a slave. So that's why everybody thinks you were a slave. But they literally wrote that free Moorish jurisdiction out of American history. We've always had our own thing. You know what I'm saying? Literally all across the Black Belt and the so-called South, you still got a lot of these so-called majority Mississippian towns. Those towns have always been that way. From Selma, Alabama to Casita, Alabama to Meridian, so-called Mississippi, all these Moorish towns. These are old free Moorish towns with their own jurisdiction. They became under United States trusteeship and incorporated under the United States later on after a lot of these wars and stuff like that. So they're going to tell you that you was a slave, but literally they're writing out a whole history of you having your own jurisdiction in your own towns. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. So they want to build up arms on the Southwest Florida coast, okay, to resist removal. Yaha Haju, a Seminole war chief, Yaha Haju, a Seminole war sheik affiliated with head sheik Mikasupi, Mikasuki or something like that, Mikakopi, and so-called black Seminole advisor Abraham. He's just another Muslim, you know what I'm saying? And Seminole black Seminole leader, so-called black Seminole leader John Caesar, second hand to King Philip, were mostly responsible for the enlistment drive. So they're telling you right now in this rewritten history, they're always gonna talk about how they're always gonna say these were so-called black Seminoles. You know what I'm saying? Like because they're really, again, these people write in code, so they want to delineate. But notice how when they describe the so-called black Seminoles, they're talking about these guys are leaders. These guys are military leaders. You know what I'm saying? These guys are like organizing. They're literally having an enlistment drive. So that means they're actually well-established militia and army, like a literal militia and army all through Florida, all through Alabama, all through Georgia, and they're doing an enlistment drive. And they literally tell you right here that the so-called black Seminoles are the ones who are organizing everything. It just said. A Seminole war, it said Yaha Haju, a Seminole war chief affiliated with head chief Mekas, my handwriting is messed up, but Micanopy, I think Micanopy, and black Seminole advisor Abraham, okay? And black Seminole leader John Caesar, second hand to King Philip, were mostly responsible for the enlistment drive. So again, these brothers were some bad brothers. They literally had the funds, the guns, the connections to get hundreds of people to rally to the cause, to want to take up arms and fight for the Muslim cause in the South against the so-called United States. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. Now we're going to talk about, Caesar, a sub-chief, was commissioned to the plantations on St. John's region to hold out inducement to the Negroes to join them. Okay. So literally they sending out this John Caesar, so-called black Seminole leader, military, high military ranking official in the Moorish army, to go get the so-called Negroes to join them. Now, understand one thing, and let me just read through this because we're gonna go into this on the next page. Now we're gonna break down a lot of this plantation and Negro stuff and slave stuff, and just read through the lines on a lot of this stuff. So check it out. So it says, black Seminoles. It says something about I think one of the Europeans was complaining about black Seminoles tampering with Negroes on sugar plantations. Now, one thing you got to understand when you read about this stuff and they're talking about they want to get the Negro and so-called Negroes to join them and everything. Understand when they say slave in a lot of the history books, it can mean a lot of different things. You know what I'm saying? But one of the main things they're discussing when they say slaves and Negroes, a lot of these people are just civilians. You know what I'm saying? like they always going to they're always going to delineate the active. So it's just like in gang territory or whatever. You gonna have your active gang bangers. You know what I'm saying? They call them brothers active, and you just gonna have civilians in the neighborhood. We the same people, and you might have people that support them. You know what I'm saying? That support what they doing or whatever. But they're active, and then you got civilians. So to a settler coming into the territory, he don't know nobody. You know what I'm saying? They don't know these people. They don't know like a lot of these people. A lot of the Moors are free Moors, and they just doing their thing in Florida, in Georgia, in Alabama, in these places. But these people are undocumented. You know what I'm saying? Like they're not under United States. They're not under United States census or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? These are free. These are Moors. These are people who move around and do their own thing. So to these people, in a rewritten history, they're just gonna call them Negroes because they're probably just civilians. You know what I'm saying? They're not really. And again, they may be by that time they may be dressing more European, you know what I'm saying? But then literally they may not be in their Muslim habit as much. These might just be regular niggas walking up and down the street. But they're just gonna call them slaves and Negroes just in the rewritten history. Because again, the so-called one of the terminologies they're gonna use about slaves and Negroes, these are just undocumented Moors. These people are not under United States census. They're just in the Barbary states. They're just there right now. You know what I'm saying? They're not 14th Amendment citizens yet. These people are just outside of their jurisdiction. They just doing their thing. You know what I'm saying? So they're just going to call them slaves and Negroes. But they're going to make sure to understand. They're going to make sure they know who the active Moorish militiamen is, people that's banging on them. They're going to call them the wild Indians or the Maroons or the Savages because they just active. They own it. They killers. You know what I'm saying? They out here putting in work. That's all it was. Because again, there were not that many settlers in the Deep South, all the way really up until 1865. So when they're rewriting history, they're gonna call everybody who's melanated, they're just gonna call them a slave and a Negro, and you know what I'm saying? And then they're gonna delineate and say, for a certain amount of time, the active Moors and so-called Negroes that was actually out there putting in work and banging, running down the land, going to wars and killing the Europeans and stuff like that, they're gonna call them just the wild Indians or the wild Maroons. You know what I'm saying? That's literally all it is. You know what I'm saying? So, all right. Yeah, we just talked about how they were civilians. Now, another thing we want to talk about when you read the history books when they talk about plantations, okay? Understand, plantations can mean, a so-called plantation can mean a lot of different things. A plantation, we've always, in the South, there was always blood titles. There was always large families that would have a whole plot and work their land together as a family. You know what I'm saying? And they would take they would get their land. They may employ other family members. They may have some European slaves that got caught out of bounds. You know what I'm saying? Some people that got ransomed off. They may have employed some foreigners. They may employ some foreigners or as indentures or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But the reason why they would call these places plantations, because to the northern so-called fake abolitionists and industrialists, they would call all southern estates where we would work the land together. It literally could have been a whole town. You know what I'm saying? A whole Moorish town down south where everybody was working their land together. It was an agricultural agrarian town where everybody had their own land, was working together. And it might have been a main sheik or a main patriarch in that town who might have been, he might have been cool with doing business and being a liaison to the United States or whatever. So when they go rewrite the history books, it might have been a Moorish man who they had a collective town with collective plots, but they might have had one sheik of that town or one Moorish man who was a patriarch of that town or that area who might have just been a liaison to the United States. Don't you know they will go and rewrite history books and call that man the slave master, the overseer, and they will call all of his family members or all the people in the town that was under this man, because he was the liaison, he was the head guy. Or he might have had the title to the land or whatever, but he had his people working with him or whatever. They was all splitting the bread. You know what I'm saying? They would call him the master and they would call everybody else the slaves. You know what I'm saying? And it was different situations depending on where you were. But literally they would rewrite these history. They would call these places plantations. The main reason why they would call them plantations, you know what I'm saying, is because first of all, a lot of these people in the South was largely still unsettled, especially in the Deep South. There wasn't too many of these new Europeans in the Deep South. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of these people, the Moors still in the South that was doing their thing, a lot of these people were undocumented to the United States. They weren't on the census. A lot of our people didn't really hit the United States census until after 1865 or after 1871 because we was under our own thing all the way up until then. Even though you had people joining the United States, most people didn't. So a lot of people were undocumented. You know what I'm saying? We was just there. We was doing our own thing. They didn't know who we were, so they would just write us down as slaves. They didn't know who the fuck we were. You know what I'm saying? Excuse my French. You know what I mean? So you had a plantation, and the northern industrialists would call them plantations because these southern estates and these southern people who were doing their thing, getting all this money, they were not incorporated. You know what I'm saying? Like they were getting money within their family. These were family businesses. These was like family mobbed up, getting money as families. They didn't have no LLCs. They weren't industrial. They was getting the money and taking it back home. They might have paid, if they were United States citizens, they might have paid their little taxes, but they probably didn't. You know what I'm saying? They might have some people were still Moorish, so they were still giving the money to the Moorish cause, the Moorish militias, and you know what I'm saying? Like whatever. So they would call, the northern industrialists would call these places plantations because they were not industrial. They weren't incorporated. You know what I'm saying? So they had to give it a whole bad name because like, well, we can't tax these people like that. They getting all this money down south, and we can't tax them as corporations because and we can't industrialize their place. So these are plantations, and they got slaves. It just became a whole negative connotation. You know what I'm saying? So that's really when they say plantations, it can mean a whole different thing. Now there were probably Europeans and foreigners that did own plantations. You know what I'm saying? And there were a lot of people who were criminals, trespassers, POWs that were under bond. Bondsmen. So so people could buy their bonds. They might got slaved, they might got ransomed off, or you could take them as bondsmen to an auction. You know what I'm saying? And probably sell them to whoever. It might have been a European that wanted to set up a plantation. And he might have been an Asiatic European, or he might have been a pale European or whatever. He might have been able to move to the South, was able to purchase land and get a lot of whatever. You know what I'm saying? And we might have had a lot of these prisoners of war down south, and he might have came to the auction and bought him a bondsman or two or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That's just how it was. You know what I'm saying? But they rewrite, they write these history in code and rewrite a lot of stuff. And you know what I'm saying? So you have to be able to really read through the lines. But understand, the majority of the Mississippian people in the South, the West, the Midwest, and all that have always been free. and we've always had our own jurisdiction. So you can never listen to a European rewritten Eurocentric rewritten history telling you about your history in America, because they literally do not know. They were not in our towns. They were not speaking our language. They were not dressing like us. They didn't have our religion. They don't know none of this stuff. You know what I'm saying? So they're only writing everything from their experience and their perspective of what they've been told. They don't know about the Moorish jurisdiction. Unless they are privileged, unless they speak a different language like Spanish or Latin or something like that, where the real history is written, these English-speaking people don't know your history. So they can't tell you nothing. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, just wanted to talk about plantations. So when they talk about plantations, that's really what they're talking about. These are large family estate, Moorish family estates, a lot of them. You know what I'm saying? Like, or their communities or their towns that are not under European control or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is just rewritten history as plantations. You know what I'm saying? A plantation is something that the northern clowns could not tax, and they couldn't incorporate and industrialize. So everything in the South to them northern clowns was a plantation. You know what I'm saying? You just really don't know what the hell they're talking about. You know what I mean? So anyway, yeah. Now it says that slave participants, because we're just talking about really what we're going over is like how the Moorish men were able to rally so many people to the cause of the Muslim cause in the South. And we're going to show how much support these people had amongst the civilian population, because none of the Southern Seminole Wars, the Barbary Wars, the Creek Wars would have ever been able to be as successful as they were. Even though they took a lot of losses and all that stuff, they would never been able to hold out like they were if they didn't have support amongst the civilian population. You know what I'm saying? So now it said that slave participants in East Florida hid black Seminoles. You know what I'm saying? Now it said one thing I did read in this article. It said that a lot of plantations were targeted, but specifically it does say that plantations that were assisting the United, so-called plantations, that were kind of assisting the United States and selling out. You know what I'm saying? They were targeted and burned down in Florida. So you got to do the delineation, because you got a lot of fake so-called black academics and revisionist history people that'll come in and say, oh, the Seminoles were some runaway, the so-called Seminoles and all these people were some runaway slaves, and they was burning down every plantation in Florida. That's a lot of cap. They were burning the only so-called fake plantations, because you don't know if they were towns, you don't know if they were just big farms, you don't know what they were if you're listening to the English history. You know what I'm saying? But what it did say is that the plantations of anyone who was supporting the United States advancement and helping the United States Army and state militias and all that, their plantations were targeted and burned. You know what I'm saying? It said a lot of plantation owners and a lot of people were actually helping the Seminoles. You know what I'm saying? We're helping the Southern Muslim brothers fight down there. You know what I mean? So it said, okay, a little excerpt from the article. It said most of the so-called, this is in Florida now, most of the so-called slaves lived on the frontier in the neighborhood of Indians and had wives among Indian Negroes, and Indian Negroes had wives among them. You know what I'm saying? Now, let's unpack that little article real quick. Again, let's read that little excerpt. It said most of the slaves lived on the frontier and in the neighborhood of Indians and had wives among Indian Negroes, and Indian Negroes had wives among them. Okay? So let's talk about that right there. Now, again, we just talked about how when they say slave, we don't know what these people are talking about, because, again, they're rewriting history in English. There's the majority of the jurisdiction of America, all the way up until 1865, there were so many free towns, There were so many free towns and areas in America. You know what I'm saying? Turn this way. There were so many free towns and areas in America that these people, again, that these new English-speaking people, they don't have no idea about. So when they're rewriting history, they're rewriting it from their perspective. They don't know nothing about it. So when they're calling people slaves, these people, a lot of these people are just undocumented people. They are not in the United States census. They don't know who these people are. They just regular Asiatic people walking around. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. So again, it said the slaves lived near the Indian frontier in the neighborhood of the Indians, and they had wives among the Indians. So these are probably just, again, we already talked about how after the War of 1812 and after the Barbary Wars, again, a lot of our people started switching sides, or just, you know what I'm saying, they stopped being as militant as they used to be. You know what I'm saying, as far as militant fighting Muslims. You know what I'm saying? They might just turn into regular civilians, or they might have paid for exemptions and became United States citizens. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. But these people still had their own culture, were moving around doing their own thing. So these new settler people, they didn't know nothing about these people. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know their names. They didn't know nothing. So they're just going to talk about they were slaves. So if it says slaves were living near the frontier with the Indian Negroes or whatever, all it's saying is that it might have been a more like a Mississippian person that might have been more assimilated. He might not have been a militant Muslim as much. He might not have wore his gear like he used to or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And then there might have been a certain zone where it was just strictly Muslim, where you just had the brothers and sisters that were strictly still about their life. You know what I'm saying? But they were the same people, so they were still intermingling. So that's basically the difference in what they're saying. But they don't want to give us credit, because again, we always supposed to be somebody's slave, and we ain't never supposed to have had no culture, because again, these people hate the Moors. So they're always going to rewrite everything and say the slaves and the Indians and the slaves. But it literally just said the slave. How would a slave, somebody who's a slave and has no rights, how would he be marrying with Indian, will have an Indian wife, and then the so-called Indian Negro has a slave wife? You know what I'm saying? That don't make no sense. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, again, man, these people write kindergarten fairy tales, man. You know what I'm saying? So now let's get on to some good stuff about this thing. It says this is leading up to the Seminole War. We're just talking about how, you know, we just really just going in about how much power and pull the Mississippian men had in the old Moorish demonstration, and how they could rally so many people to the cause. You know what I'm saying? And this is why they don't want you to be a Moor no more, because in the Moorish demonstration, you're able to tap into something else, and you're able to get people to follow you as being a Moor, as being a holy Moor, a man of God, a man revealing the scriptures of Allah and everything like that. People, women, and children, men follow you by the thousands when you take on that jurisdiction, when you take on that demonstration. That's why there's so much hatred. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. Now, it says, leading up to the Seminole War, this is around the time of 1865, it says, whites tried to form a militia in St. Augustine, but guns and powder disappeared, and they found free blacks and slaves assisted the uprising with arms from city stores. Okay, so that goes to show you right there. Again, we've just been talking about none of the Seminole Wars and the Creek Wars in the South. They would not have been successful if they didn't have large support from the civilian population. It just said that the whites were trying to form a militia, but the brothers and sisters in St. Augustine in that area had already stole all the guns and bought all the guns out of the store and gave it to the Seminoles. So the whites couldn't do anything. So they were literally damn near defenseless. So who had all the guns? It just said the so-called free blacks and the slaves. Again, these are people who probably converted over. They were civilian Mississippians. They weren't probably all the way United States citizens, but they weren't all the way Muslims. They went all the way down with the cause. But they were sympathetic to their family members who were still fighting for the Muslim cause. So they assisted them. So they literally took the majority of the gunpowder, the guns, they raided the armory in the city and gave everything to the fighting Muslims, or the so-called Seminoles. You know what I'm saying? And this is in 1835. You know what I'm saying? This is how we used to get down, bro. We've been rocking. Okay? Now, interesting story. It did say in one situation, one so-called slave, and just little excerpts from the Barbary Wars, just talking about how much power, how much pull the brothers had. It said one so-called slave protected the wife of William Godfrey from the Seminoles, who sought her because her husband enlisted in the East Florida militia. Okay, let's read that again. It said one so-called slave protected the wife of William Godfrey from the Seminoles, who sought her because her husband enlisted in the East Florida militia. Now let's talk about that for a second. Again, we've been talking about how after 1816, after the War of 1812 and the Barbary Wars in the South and everything, how again we had these new treaties with the United States. So after that, our military, we didn't have as strong as a military force in the South and everything in the Midwest like we used to. It was kind of broken, but a lot of people started switching sides. They started paying for exemptions. They said in the old article I went over with you guys, it said that a lot of Muslims in so-called Islamic countries, because again, the Southern Barbary states were Islamic. Technically, there were Islamic countries in the South, Southern Barbary nations. So they said a lot of local citizens, Southern Mississippians in the South, in the Midwest and all these places, they started paying the United States for exemptions from local law. So essentially what that was after 1816, you had a lot of Mississippians that was paying to become United States citizens, because that was going to give them some protection from the Muslim government, from the Barbary government that was existing in these places. Because before that, if you was under Barbary jurisdiction, you had to be held accountable to the Barbary nations in America. You know what I'm saying? To the Sultan, to the Days and the Bays and the Moorish towns and all that. We paid the taxes, paid the Moorish taxes, zakat, whatever, the alms tax. You had to give it up. You know what I'm saying? Well, that's how we kept everything together. So you had a lot of these clowns. It was like after that, like, well, I'd rather, you know what I'm saying? I want to, I'm tired of, you know what I'm saying? Because, under Muslim laws, it's kind of strict. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as strict as like fake, that Sharia stuff over in the Middle East, but, we just hold each other accountable. So a lot of people felt by switching sides and getting under protection of the United States, they didn't have to be accountable to their people no more, to the Muslim nations no more. You know what I'm saying? So that's why a lot of people switched sides. But there, a lot of people was getting told. A lot of people was getting handled for, they was getting the things put on for doing stuff like that. So it just said the Seminoles. That means they had to know this brother, this European, or whoever it is. But the Seminoles were looking for William Godfrey's wife because he joined the East Florida militia. So the so-called Seminoles and the Muslims must have knew this guy, knew his family, knew who he was, because again, it was the same people. So this fool probably was opting to help the United States, so he might have been a traitor to the Muslim cause in Florida. So they tried to kidnap his wife. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what was going on. It was real. You know what I'm saying? Like that's how a lot of these states started forming after the War of 1812, all through the West, because so many Mississippians were sitting up here paying for exemptions because they wanted to leave the Barbary states and join the United States. That's all that happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's literally not that deep. It wasn't just all these settlers that just started coming. It was so many Mississippians wanting to become United States citizens because they want to get they don't want to be Muslims no more. They thinking they finna be free. You know what I'm saying? They have a little bit more leeway. The same clown shit, it's just the same clown mess you see now. It's like I'd rather have my life managed by this entity because it's hard to handle all my own business and be accountable in the Muslim government, man. But again, they all end up getting played and losing everything because again, the devil always breaks his tools, and cats gonna learn at some point. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. So just thought that was an interesting. I just thought that was an interesting excerpt. Now, the famous quote that was told to Andrew Jackson was about the Southern Creek Wars, specifically the Second Seminole War, but just about the Creek Wars in general. Because again, the so-called Seminole Wars are just the Creek Wars. The Creek Wars lasted literally from 1813 all the way to 1865. It didn't stop. You know what I'm saying? So it said, one of the generals told Andrew Jackson, said, and it ain't like Andrew Jackson didn't know because he was a melanated man himself, but he said, "This, you may be assured, is a Negro war, not an Indian war." So they're making the delineation. So they're talking about the Seminole War. This is a Negro war because essentially what the general was telling Andrew Jackson is that what everybody kind of knows is that in the Moorish Barbary states, the Asiatic man, the Mississippian, the man of the Mississippian phenotype, they are the military bosses, they are the top sheiks, they are running everything. So again, the last time the Asiatic man had his own demonstration where he was the boss and the don for real, and you couldn't tell him nothing. You couldn't tell him more like me nothing. You know what I'm saying? They couldn't send no police or no feds or none of that nonsense after a more like me. You know what I'm saying? Was in the Moorish Barbary states. And it just said right here, this you may be assured is a Negro war. Because they know who the bosses are, not an Indian war. And essentially what they're saying when they say not an Indian war is because, again, we had all type of different people of different phenotypes. You might have had somebody who looked like a Moro Philippine, who was a so-called Seminole in Florida. They had the real Asiatic Siberian type of look, or Mongoloid looking people. They might have been with us. They were Muslims. They wore the turbans. They wore everything with us. They were rocking with us. You know what I'm saying? They were in our militias, in our towns, and all that. But understand, the main sheiks and the main military men were always the Moorish men. So they were under us. That's why he said it was a Negro war, not an Indian war. Because the Indians, they weren't the bosses. They weren't running nothing. You know what I'm saying? The so-called Indian, the Mongoloid looking Indians, they weren't running nothing. The Moorish men, who they were trying to reclassify already back then and denationalize as Negroes, was running everything. It just said it. You know what I'm saying? Now, yeah. Now we're just gonna talk about when they say Negro at this time. This is what they're saying, as referring to the so-called Negro War in Florida and Alabama and all that stuff. The Negroes are the Moorish Barbary bosses. You know what I'm saying? Like we the Dons, the Sheiks, the Islamic Sheiks, the Bay, the Days, the Bays, you know what I'm saying? The Bay of Algiers, the Day of Algiers, these are the so-called Negroes, you know what I'm saying? The Moorish Negroes, the Moorish men, you know what I'm saying? Now, they call these people, in the history books, you're all going to say they're going to call them rebels, and they're going to call them maroons, and they're going to call them renegades. You know what I'm saying? Because essentially, understand, we did the Moroccan Treaty with the Sultan, who's another Moorish man, you know what I'm saying, did the Moroccan Treaty of 1787, peace of friendship with the United States. Now, essentially, everybody was supposed to, the Southern Barbary states, the Midwest Confederacy, the Western states, everything was supposed to abide by that treaty. We were supposed to always respect Europeans, Christians, all that stuff, you know what I'm saying? And just kind of let these settlers and these newer people, we were supposed to let them get their freedom and all that. We were supposed to let them kind of move around and release everybody, and we snatched up from jail and all that. But you already know, man. This is a confederacy, and you already know a lot of niggas just was not going for that. So that caused the whole civil war. And the Sultan, to keep it a buck, even to the Sultan, whether it worked out better or worse for the whole Moorish nation in America. The Sultan, honestly, he was trying to really abide by that treaty. That's why he ended up back in the Union. So he always, and he was the one who was really giving, because he controlled the Moorish, because he had a lot of sway. He didn't have absolute power, but he had a lot of sway over the whole Moorish jurisdiction in America, which was really the majority of America. The majority of the towns in the old America were Moorish. You know what I'm saying? Let's just keep it a buck. It just is what it is. You know what I'm saying? So the Sultan had the jurisdiction over those. He had the jurisdiction over all that. You know what I'm saying? Or he had the main sway over all of that. So he was honestly trying to abide by the treaty for the most part. But a lot of the Southerners and stuff like that, we wasn't really with all that, because we kind of saw we kind of saw through a lot of it. And even to this day, I kind of agree. You know what I'm saying? It's like a lot of the Southerners and the Midwesterners, like Tecumseh and all these people, they saw that if we let too many Europeans come amongst us, we saw that they had a lot of influence over our women. A lot of these people were Christians. They didn't like Islam. You know what I'm saying? Like they were just unruly. They ate pork. They ate all type of They were drunkards. They were just wild. And you know, they like to party too much. They just not. You know what I'm saying? They are not like us. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of the Southerners just wasn't really trying to go for that. So we just kept. So we, you know what I'm saying? We kind of started bombing on these people. We just kept it going. But they would call them. But the Europeans and the settlers would call. You know what I'm saying? The whole renegade term. It's not necessarily that we were renegade, the Southern Moors or whatever were renegade Negroes or Maroons. It's not that we were renegade because we were rebelling against Europeans. Because again, these Europeans could not do nothing without this all the way up until 1812. And even in 1836 when they had to renew that treaty, you know what I'm saying? They still had to deal with the Sultan in a certain type of way. And the main reason why, even though we were militarily a lot weaker at that time, even in 1836, the main reason why the United States had to still do business and renew treaties with the Sultan was because the Sultan still had a lot of international ties and plugs and recognition. So the United States still had to do a lot of international business. So if they was doing wrong by the Sultan, who was in America, that was gonna make it hard for them to do international business at that time. So they still had to deal with the Sultan. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't that they would call us renegades and stuff like that. But it wasn't they were calling us renegades because we were rebelling against them, because they really didn't have no jurisdiction over no Moors like that. You know what I'm saying? They were essentially calling us renegades because they were like, well, y'all are rebelling against the Sultan who got this treaty, who signed this treaty with us, and we can move around and all that. And of course, you know, the so-called United States, you know, they were, you know, a lot of them people who were in there, they were dishonorable, breaking treaties and doing all type of nonsense. So you can't really blame the Southerners for wanting to fight all of that. You know what I'm saying? It was just, I think it was just destined. It was just destined for some nonsense. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. Because too many people have gotten in their lower selves and didn't want to maintain their customs and everything. So it was just destined to descend into hell. You know what I'm saying? So, but just wanted to talk about that. When they talk about renegade Negroes and renegade Maroons and all that, essentially they're talking about we were rebelling against our own country, not to the United States Christians, because at that time they had no jurisdiction over us. They have no power over the real Muslims who kept their culture and everything intact. You know what I'm saying? Now, again, another thing we're going to talk about real quick, just breaking down a little history, is if you do the knowledge to how after the War of 1812 and all that, yep, and you know, even in the early 1800s, we talk about the Louisiana Purchase and east and west Florida, how Spain ceded the territory, ceded the territory to the United States, or France gave the whole Louisiana Purchase to the United States. They're gonna make you think. they really gonna, like I said, they like to give us some kindergarten history. They're really gonna make you think that the United States and Thomas Jefferson just bought that much land for like $16 million or some crazy stuff. And France had that much sway. So-called France had that much land and that much sway to just give it to the so-called United States. You know what I'm saying? Like that's always been a lot of cap. Or that Spain, or so-called Spain, because again, this is Morocco. The land, the jurisdiction of the towns and all that is independent. This is Moorish Moroccan jurisdiction. You know what I'm saying? The so-called Spain and France and Britain and all that stuff, they never had that much power in this country. You know what I'm saying? That's why they had to do treaties with Morocco to even come over here like that. They had to get most favored nation status to do business over here for the longest time. Same with the United States. You know what I'm saying? So when they're talking about how Spain or France ceded territory to the United States, all they're telling you is so-called Spain or so-called France, they had it's just like how the United States has military posts, federal penitentiaries, federal post offices, and federal zones of jurisdiction that you know what I'm saying, that they just control or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like but the rest of the land is pretty much for the states, the towns, municipalities, and all. They got their own jurisdiction. It was like that back then. You know what I'm saying? So Spain, we would let different nations do their business in different places. So Spain, in so-called east and west Florida in the south, they had their little forts. We let them have their forts, their embassies, their little locations. They could move around because they had treaties in those areas. You know what I'm saying? With the days and the bays of those areas. You know what I'm saying? They could do their thing there. You know what I'm saying? When they would leave it, when things got hot or whatever, They just sold everything, and I think a lot of these European nations consolidated with the United States because they said the United States we're gonna invest all of our European Christian money and everything into the United States. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the we can use that as a vessel for everybody's agenda, which is exactly what happened. You know what I'm saying? So Spain and France and all these countries and all these European Christian nations and all that stuff, they ceded. They sold their little barracks, their military posts, their forts, their installations. They just basically sold them to the United States. But the United States did not have the so-called United States didn't have no jurisdiction over all the land like that. So France might have sold little posts in so-called New Orleans, so-called St. Louis, and all that stuff to the United States. Just little posts. They didn't sell that whole piece of land to no United States. That's that fake kindergarten reconstructed history. That stuff is still Morocco. They still had to do treaties with the Sultan to be able to move around on them type of places. You know what I'm saying? Still a whole bunch of Moorish independent towns in all those places. None of the fake cessional lands from Spain to the United States and Louisiana and all that stuff ever really affected the Moors like that. You know what I'm saying? We were still rocking in our towns and nothing like that because that had nothing to do with us. Again, there was two jurisdictions. There was the after the United States, there was their jurisdiction, United States citizens, and there was the Moorish jurisdiction. The Moorish jurisdiction history is never written about. You know what I'm saying? So just doing a knowledge to that. Now, yeah. All right. So now we're just gonna go over real quick. The Red Stick War. I know we're going a long time, but it's just a lot. Just kind of a lot to cover. So yeah. Now we're just gonna talk about we talked about the Southern War, but we just want to talk about the Red Stick War, and I want to kind of go over to Tecumseh, who was another Moorish Mississippian man, and how he came in and just kind of rallied the troops around the time of the War of 1812. And we're just talking about how in the old Moorish demonstration, the Moorish Mississippian men were the dons and the bosses. And again, due to their oratory skills and their persuasion, their charisma, they were able to rally people to fight. You know what I'm saying? And that's why nobody wants us to be Moors no more, because that's how we get down. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. We'll talk about the Red Stick Wars and Tecumseh. So now, let's see. Now it says in 1811, Tecumseh, who claimed Creek ancestry, so that means he was, you know what I'm saying, he was a brother. You know what I'm saying? He already telling you he claimed so-called Creek ancestry, which is from the South, Mekasuki, which is a nigga. You know what I'm saying? Ain't nothing in the South really but niggas. You feel me? So Tecumseh, he visited the Southeast in 1811, and he gave impassioned speeches. To several Indian nations. These are the Moorish Barbary nations of the South, to several so-called Indian nations. And he appealed to his. This is an actual article now. It said he appealed to his kinfolk. This was in the article. Okay, we're gonna start over. That's what I like how they wrote it, because they pretty much tell you that Tecumseh was a nigga. You know what I'm saying? So they said in 1811, Tecumseh, who claimed Creek ancestry, he was from Ohio, Indiana country. You know what I'm saying? He's from the Shawnee Midwest Confederacy. He was like a boss dog general in the old Midwest Confederacy. You know what I'm saying? So, and they were all Muslims. We already know that. So, Tecumseh, who claimed Creek ancestry, visited the Southeast 1811. He gave impassioned speeches to several Indian nations. He appealed to his kinfolk to rise up and cast out the European intruders and resist assimilation into their culture. It said the so-called Choctaw and the Chickasaw rejected the message, but the Muslim Creeks, I injected that Muslim in there, but the Creeks, mainly the uppers and the lower Creeks, accepted the message. And Tecumseh's oratory helped spark the Creek Civil War, which brought in the U.S. Army. Okay, now, who that sound like? So Tecumseh, he came to the South. He a Muslim. He turbaned up and everything. You know what I'm saying? He's just trying to maintain the old culture. You know what I'm saying? Because he understands that these Europeans is coming in and they influence a lot of our people. They're just having an effect of influencing the women. They influence a lot of our people to give up their customs and assimilate and be European. But who that sound like? This brother just came down south and he gave a bunch of speeches to the Moors in the South. And he was like, man, we got to rise up, take up arms, and let's bust some heads. Don't that sound like a Malcolm X or somebody? You know what I'm saying? we've been rocking like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it literally sounded like something Malcolm X would have said. You know what I'm saying? Or Huey Newton or something like that. You know what I mean? So he came down south. He fired everybody up, and he said it literally said his oratory helped spark the Creek Civil War, which was an offshoot of the War of 1812. You know what I'm saying? So he inspired cats to pick up arms and start killing Europeans. I mean, he was not playing no games. You know what I'm saying? Like that's again, we're just talking about how in the old Moorish demonstration, how much firepower, how much sway the Moorish Mississippian men had. It ain't no different from like how in the current state of hip hop and all that stuff, how much influence the Moorish man's oratory skills can have. The Tupacs, the Biggies, even a lot of the rappers to this day, the 50 Cent, you know what I'm saying? All these rappers they were able to get so many followers based on their oratory skills and their skill, their creativity and their swag and everything. We've always been rocking like that. But there was a time, see, in the current times, the Europeans can supervise and capitalize off of that stuff. There was a time in the Moorish demonstration where you literally you could have those oratory skills and inspire your people to literally rise up, and nobody could do nothing about it. You know what I'm saying? Nobody could get no money off of it. Nobody could take your swag, take your style. Literally, you could do it under your own independent demonstration. And literally, the only person managing over you was God himself. You know what I'm saying? It was just crazy. So we just gonna go through the Creek War. Okay, so we're gonna see. This is how gangster Tecumseh was, and what he helped spark brothers in the South to do. You know what I'm saying? So right after that, you had the War of 1812 that jumped off, and the Creek Civil War, because we already talked about the Creek Civil War and how it was the red sticks versus the white sticks, and essentially, the only reason the so-called U.S. Army was able to even advance through the South and come into the so-called Alabama, North Georgia, and all that stuff was because the lames and the assimilationist Creeks, so-called Creeks, you know what I'm saying, the mulattoes and all these people, they since the so-called Southern Red Sticks was going up there bombing on them people, you know what I'm saying, bombing and killing traitors and all that stuff, they called up Andrew Jackson and the United States Army to help them. Because they was getting, we was running up there whooping their ass, you know what I'm saying, for being traitors and assimilationists and stuff like that. After Tecumseh came down and got us riled up, you feel me? So check it out. Now, it said initially, what started off was, of course they had a lot of intel and a lot of the so-called fake Cherokees and Creeks and just the traitors, you know what I'm saying, the Choctaws, the people who wanted to assimilate, the traitors, you know what I'm saying. They helped the United States Army try to attack a Creek platoon, a red stick platoon, because the red sticks are the fighting Muslims who wore the reds, you know what I'm saying, the red, they probably tied the red bandanas around their rifles and all that stuff, you know what I'm saying. But it said initially in 1812, one of the first kickoffs was they tried to attack a Creek red stick platoon that was coming back from Pensacola with arms and stuff like that. They tried to do a sneak attack on the Red Sticks, and the Red Sticks pretty much destroyed the U.S. Army, destroyed that whole company. The U.S. Army and the Trader Creeks, they got destroyed in the Battle of Burnt Corn Creek. You know what I'm saying? Now, let's see. Then it said right after that, they pissed the Red Sticks off. So again, the Red Sticks are the traditionalists. The traditionalist Muslims that wasn't trying to give up their culture. They were still trying to wear their turbans. They weren't trying to be European and assimilate and all that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Just like the brothers now, But it said the Red Sticks, they attacked Fort Mims in Alabama, and they killed 250 fort residents, and they burnt the whole fort to the ground. So, it was on the cracking. Now, again, this is from... it was always brewing, but they said when Tecumseh came down, he was literally sounding like speaking like Malcolm X or somebody, because he said they were already feeling this way, but they said when they heard their brother speak, they was like, oh, it's on. We finna start bombing on these Europeans. We finna get their ass up out of here. You know what I'm saying? Like that's all it takes. You know what I'm saying? Because again, in the Moorish demonstration, the brothers are able to rally people to fight. You know what I'm saying? And do whatever. So it said almost all of the fighting in the Red Stick War. Now, it said the Battle of Fort Mims actually inspired a lot of people, lames, to join the United States Army and the state militia, because they said it was a massacre. The Muslims down there killed so many Christians and Europeans and all this stuff. So You know, that's what inspired a lot of people to join the army and want to go down and invade and all that stuff. You know how that goes. So, almost all of the fighting occurred in so-called Mississippi territory, and all that was that's the Barbary states of the South. But they're gonna tell you the Mississippi territory. The Europeans are gonna call it so-called Mississippi territory because they didn't really have a state formed yet in these areas because it was still our stuff. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have enough people on their side yet. It said U.S. forces won several victories such as Odyssey, and Holy Ground. That shows you Holy Ground. You know what I'm saying? That shows you use Muslims in the South. We had locations like that, but they failed to follow up with sustained campaigns as consequence of severe shortage of supplies, inadequate transportation and communication, and short-term enlistments. So, essentially, it just talks about how, the United States, they won some victories or whatever, but they just weren't. They really weren't able to deal with the red sticks like that in the South. And initially in the war, when the war started, because they didn't have the numbers, they didn't have people who wanted to stay in the war. They didn't have, they didn't have the supplies, and we knew the land. It was too many of us. We knew the land and all that, so we were still keeping up the resistance in the South, in the Creek Wars or whatever. So they did say, of course, we know what happened with Andrew Jackson. He won the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Battle of Talladega. He kind of just did a warpath through the South, mainly because it was a lot easier for Andrew Jackson to go through the South and kind of get an upper hand over the so-called red sticks because you just had so many you had so many Mississippian turncoats at that time who were trying to help who helped the United States. The Mississippians, the assimilationist Mississippians called the United States to help them because the real Muslims was going up there tearing their towns up for being traitors. You know what I'm saying? So the United States came into the Creek Civil War. This was our Civil War. You know what I'm saying? They came into our stuff and they got involved and they kind of just were able to shut everybody down. You know what I'm saying? Because we was fighting with each other. You know what I mean? So, and then let's see. They said, of course, after that, they forced us to sign the Treaty of Fort. They forced the Red Sticks to sign the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which ceded a lot of. They kind of ceded a lot of land, opened a lot of land in Central Alabama for settlement and everything. And again, the interesting part about it is all of the goofy turncoats that helped Andrew Jackson advance to the South, and Andrew Jackson ended up playing them too because they lost a lot of their land to settlement to the land cessions and all that stuff. So again, these people thought they were gonna get something by not wanting to be Muslim no more and trying to assimilate and be European and all that, but they ended up getting played by the same clown they tried to help by Andrew Jackson. You know what I'm saying? Again, just stand on your square. You're never gonna get anything by being a coward and a traitor. You know what I'm saying? Just if you pick a side, stick with it. You feel me? So let's see. And then Andrew Jackson went on to New Orleans, and we're gonna do the knowledge to how New Orleans is really Algiers. You know what I'm saying? It's really the historic Algiers. That's New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? Now, just wanted to go into let's go into that real quick. I just wanted to talk about how New Orleans is the real Algiers. So now they talk about how let's see. Now, it's interesting. See, this is how you got to read between the lines and do your own research. Now, it'll tell you about how Andrew Jackson, he fought the Battle of New Orleans. But if you do the history, you really read between the lines, they'll tell you that they had the so-called Second Battle of Barbary War. And it said that Andrew Jackson fought the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. But if you also do the research on the so-called Second Barbary War, that also happened in 1815. You know what I'm saying? It was the U.S. Algerian War. You know what I'm saying? So, literally, if you connect the dots, the so-called U.S. Algerian War is really the Battle of New Orleans because, again, Algeria is Louisiana, and Algiers, the historic city of Algiers, as far as the United States is concerned, is New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? So, it said that after the war, let's see. Let me see. I had some notes on this stuff. Okay, so we're just gonna talk about the Battle of New Orleans and how the U.S. Algerian War was really the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. You know what I'm saying? So Okay, it said, this is some notes I took. Following the War of 1812, Algiers sided with the so-called British. No, that wasn't Andrew Jackson going down to New Orleans to fight the British. No, come on, man. You know what I'm saying? Again, and the reason why we know Algiers is New Orleans is because literally there's a section in New Orleans called Algiers and Algiers Point, a whole neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? A whole area. You know what I'm saying? And you already, again, you got to read between the lines because these people are not going to tell you your history. But we've always, we had our own jurisdiction. You know what I'm saying? So, it said British President James Madison recommended a declaration of state of war between the Dey and Regency of Algiers in 1815. Now, this is how you know they slip up a lot. So I did the research. Now they don't want to admit that the Battle of New Orleans was really the U.S. Algerian War. You know what I'm saying? But they try to in so-called a lot of the Wikipedia, a lot of the articles, they're going to say that the Battle of New Orleans happened in January of 1815, and then the Battle of Algiers, so-called Algiers, happened in like May of 1815 or something like that. But I read a separate article that actually I think it got the dates right, and it talked about how they actually sent the fleet. They set out to send the fleet out to Algiers in 1814. You know what I'm saying? In the late part of 1814. So that would have made it around the same time that it would have arrived in so-called New Orleans or Algiers around the early part of 1815 when the so-called Battle of New Orleans happened. That was the second article I read, so that just goes to show. So it said Congress authorized the president to use the U.S. Navy to protect commerce and seamen, and also use privateers, which is like Blackwater. You know what I'm saying? You know how the United States Army is always employing private contractors, to do a lot of the dirty stuff. You know what I'm saying? How they go. They've been doing that way back then. So they sent a 10-ship squadron. It left New York en route to Algiers, which is, again, this New Orleans. So, and they encountered the Algerian flagship Meshota. Okay, so that goes to show that we had our own navy and our own ships all in the South, all in the Gulf of Mexico, as recently as the mid 1800s. You know what I'm saying? So, and it captured the Meshota off the Battle of Cape Gata, and captured the Algerian brig Estado in the Battle of Cape Palos. And when they reached Algiers, they initiated negotiations with the Bay. With the Bay of Algiers, which is whoever the Bay of New Orleans was, it was the Bay of Algiers. You know what I'm saying? So literally they're telling you right now that New Orleans literally had a bay that was running it. Just like they have a mayor running it now. It used to be a bay running Algiers, aka New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? So let's see. It said the Bay signed a treaty off the Bay of Algiers. And the United States returned their ships, and they basically did a prison swap. You know what I'm saying? But again, if you do the timeline of a lot of these articles, they're gonna act like the Battle of so-called U.S. Algerian War happened right after the Battle of New Orleans. But I found a secondary article that literally lined right up with the time of the Battle of New Orleans and the time that they so-called sent the Navy squadron out of New York to Algiers. You know what I'm saying? So these people switch it up all the time. I just want my Moorish family to understand. Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. There's an Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, Barbary states in America, and there's one over in North Africa. The United States was fighting the Barbary Wars in America. Britain and France and all them other countries were fighting the Barbary states in Africa. So anytime you hear about the United States fighting the Barbary Wars and all, because again, the European nations came together. They kind of formed a NATO alliance back then. So anytime you read about the United States fighting the so-called Barbary Wars, they were fighting with the Barbary states of America, and Britain and all them were fighting with the Barbary states in North Africa. Because after the United States was formed, I think a lot of the European states who were becoming democracies, and they were getting rid of their own nobility and becoming like federal republics and all that stuff. They consolidated everything, their power and their resources and all that stuff into the United States. You know what I'm saying? So against the Moors, of course, you know how they go. So yeah, man. Again, another marathon. It did say that Britain attacked again, like right after in 1816, right after the U.S. Algerian War. Britain went down there and attacked. They went over there and they attacked Algiers over there on North Africa. And I believe that they were really going over there and attacking them. They weren't attacking, you know what I'm saying? They came in, they enforced more treaties on them over there. So it was, you know what I'm saying, they know what's going on back then. You know what I'm saying? And back then it was just they were fighting with the Moors, you know what I'm saying? Now, one more thing I wanted to go into, and I'm gonna be real quick so we can kind of shut this down. But one thing I want to go into is they had a specific story that was very interesting. You know what I'm saying? I want to show y'all how even in our own community, even some of the women have been rebelling against, because everybody wanted to rebel and go against the Moorish demonstration, because in the old Moorish demonstration in the Moorish Empire, all of these other men of other nationalities, they had to pay tribute to the Moorish men. You know what I'm saying? They had to get their head kicked. They got arrested by Moorish men. They got told, a lot of them got told what to do by Moorish men. You know what I'm saying? They had to sign treaties with Moorish men. You know what I mean? So, and we never treated our women like trash. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, even though we had harems and royal harems and all of that, the Moorish women were always of high status. They were always had a lot of sway. So the fact that people were able to convince a lot of the Moorish women at whatever point to want to abandon their Muslim culture and want to go and want to, be more European or whatever, it's kind of mind blowing, because in old Moorish culture, the Mississippian Moorish women were very well protected. They had a lot of say. You know what I'm saying? Even though the men were masculine and they ran the armies and they all that, the sisters they were never oppressed like that. They were actually uplifted. You know what I'm saying? And held to a high standard and held as nobility. You know what I'm saying? So it's crazy that we were able to convince so many people to go away. But we'll talk about one instance of a so-called Cherokee Tusalagi sister named Nancy Ward. You know what I'm saying? And how she sat up here in the 1700s and the early 1800s. She sat up here and helped Europeans. And it was pillow talking with Europeans and saving Europeans' lives and stuff from Muslim attacks, and how she got played in the end when the so-called Tusalagi had to give everything up. You know what I'm saying? Again, it's no point to stand on your square. It's no point. Just pick a side and stick with it. You know what I'm saying? All that side switching ain't gonna never get you nowhere. But let's talk about Nancy Ward. You know what I'm saying? And then we're gonna shut it down. So they said that Nancy Ward was a beloved woman and political leader of the Cherokee. She advocated for peaceful existence with European Americans. Okay, she was born in Chota, in a Chota town in East Tennessee. Her name, her Cherokee name or Islamic name was Nahia. You know what I'm saying? Of course, again, all of the so-called ghetto names, Akeisha, Aisha, and all that stuff, there's old Muslim names. You know what I'm saying? Like this, that we've always had names like that. That's why they want to trash it and call them ghetto, because they don't want anything with the frequency going back to your old Muslim culture. They don't want you to have that. You know what I'm saying? They're gonna always talk down on that type of stuff. So, and they said her father was a Lenape man. You know what I'm saying? Named Five Killer. But she said she married another Tusalagi man named Sula. And he was a war fighter, but he ended up getting killed in battle. Now, in a battle in the late 1700s, mid 1700s or something like that. So after her husband Sula died in battle, and she actually helped him in battle. She actually went to battle with him, and she actually got a high status in so-called Tusalagi society right after that battle. You know what I'm saying? But she married a Christian Irish man named Bryant Ward after her husband passed away. And they had a daughter named. Their daughter ended up marrying later in life. Ended up marrying a man named General Joseph Martin in the United States Army. But it did say that Bryant Ward left her for his first wife, and went back to his base in South Carolina. So that just goes to show that he was a military man, but he was a European Christian man. You know what I'm saying? So he could have been melanated. He could have been so-called they say he's Irish, but he could have been mixed. He could have been European, Caucasian, or he could have been like a melanated Irish man. You know what I'm saying? Because there was a lot of them around. So, but it said he left her for his first wife. So who that sound like? Who does a lot of that stuff? Who comes here? I ain't even gonna say that. I ain't even gonna say the type of people that do that. But who always comes here, sits up here, gets with American women, gets with Mississippian American women, and then but they always got a whole bunch of other wives all over different countries and other towns and stuff, and they'll have a baby with you, but then they'll abandon you. You know what I'm saying? I'm just want to let y'all say, who has a reputation for doing that to this day? That's probably the same person. That's probably the same type of person this was. You know what I'm saying? This stuff has been going on. You know, but it said that he returned to his base. She received the battle honors for as she became an actual councilwoman in the Cherokee, the Cherokee Nation or whatever, in the Tusalagi Nation because of her, her heroicism in battle. You know what I'm saying? And it said that she was one of the people who met with John Seaver, the Seaver delegation, to discuss American settlements on the Little Pigeon River in East Tennessee after the Revolutionary War. So, interestingly enough, the Tusalagi were actually, they were giving the Europeans, they were the ones giving the Europeans permission to even set up their settlements in so-called Tennessee, which is Tunis or Tunisia. You know what I'm saying? East after the Revolutionary War, so they had to actually meet with the Tusalagi to even get land allotted for them to even set up their first little towns in so-called East Tennessee. You know what I'm saying? So, but this is where it gets interesting. Their so-called Nancy Ward's cousin was Dragging Canoe. Now we already know Dragging Canoe. He was the leading rebel Muslim of the so-called Chickamauga. You know what I'm saying? And the Chickamauga was known for bombing on Europeans for like 20 or 30 years in East Tennessee. Like they was giving them settlers hell. They was snatching them up, doing slave raids, taking them as captives. They were really keeping them settlers at bay. They would not let them move into no parts of East. They would not let them move into North Georgia, deep in the so-called New Tennessee or Alabama. The Chickamauga held them at bay for like years. You know what I'm saying? But Dragging Canoe, he was like the leader of the Chickamauga, the founder of the Chickamauga, really. But Nancy Ward was his cousin. So check out what she did. So let's see. Where we at? Now, it said in 1776, now we already know what popped off in 1776, you know what I'm saying? But in 1776, she warned some Europeans about a Chickamauga attack, and she saved their lives. And then, because she's sitting up here pillow talking with Europeans, because Dragging Canoe is her cousin now, you know what I'm saying? This is a real Muslim man, you know what I'm saying? A Mississippian man, like gangster, you know what I mean? She knew that they was planning an attack on them Europeans, and she went up there and told them Europeans, you know what I'm saying, and they ended up reorganizing a counterattack and actually killing some Chickamauga, you know what I'm saying. So remember when we always talk about all the pillow talking and all that stuff? This has been going on for so. This is how these Europeans have been able to advance so far in America because of all the pillow talking, all the side switching, and all the nonsense. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people just do not have pride in their own culture. You know what I'm saying? And this is just a lot of the turncoat and all that has really resulted in us taking so many losses. You know what I'm saying? It goes all the way back here. This Mississippian woman, Nancy Ward, was sitting up here pillow talking with Europeans. And not only did she tell them that the Chickamauga was going to attack them in 1776, they were able to form a counterattack. And when the Chickamauga attacked, they was able to beat them back. And they would kill some Chickamauga in retaliation. You know what I'm saying? Just goofball stuff, man. You know what I'm saying? You gotta watch people closest to you a lot of times. You know, it'd be your own family that sell you up the river. You know what I mean? Now, again, there's another instances that Nancy Ward, she was able to save a whole bunch. Like, the Chickamauga was doing all type of slave raids all over the South. They said it was going as high, they was going way up into Kentucky and Ohio, and they was snatching up Europeans left and right. But it said Nancy Ward, she was, she had the authority to kind of save a lot of the slaves. She was taking a lot of the captured Christian slaves, in her home and trying to help them, setting them free and all that, which is, I guess a noble thing to do. But, she really had a thing and an affinity for Europeans. You know what I'm saying? Like, she was kind of directly or indirectly undermining the Chickamauga rebel Muslim cause that was just essentially just trying to keep the settlers in their zone. And it was trying to keep the rest of the country Muslim. You know what I'm saying? We was not trying to assimilate. You know what I'm saying? And that's really the so-called Chickamauga Cherokee Wars. That's a part of the Barbary Wars. You know what I'm saying? Because if you look at the time period of a lot of them, you're going to see that they coincide with a lot of the so-called Barbary Wars. You know what I'm saying? So, let's see. Now, yeah, it said she did it again in 1780. She warned some patriots of Muslim attacks, so they was able to get away. It said she was always helping Europeans and warning them every time the Chickamauga was planning attacks on the European settlements and stuff like that. So to this day, You know, they write all these articles. The Europeans write all these articles about this Nancy Ward, and like she was just like this great woman. And I guess to them, I guess I understand that, but to her own people, to her own people, she was a very she really was a traitor. You know what I'm saying? And let me read a little bit more. And I'm gonna drive this home for a lot of these people, because a lot of this has a lot of relevance to what happened to our people in like the 20th century. You know what I'm saying? So. They said she had spent all this time helping Europeans and warning them of tax and trying to be assimilated and all that, trying to get the crazy Mississippian Muslim man not to hurt these Europeans and all that. But it said in the end, around the time of the mid 1800s, she was speaking up to the Europeans in the United States about all of them wanting to the so-called Cherokee to Tuskegee to cede all of their land. And so she had spent years and years helping Europeans, warning them, helping them with attacks and all that, warning them of attacks, helping them and all of that. But it said by the time the mid 1800s, the 1812s and 1820s came around, they said that the United States would sit up there ignoring her. She was trying to speak out because she was high in the Cherokee Council. She was trying to speak out against all the Cherokee land cessions that the United States was trying to force on the so-called Cherokee. And they said they was like ignoring her and just casting her to the side like she didn't even exist. Like she wasn't helping them clowns all these years. You know what I'm saying? So she got played, just like the rest of these people who always turncoated and didn't want to be Muslim. They all got played. Now, and then she said you said the Chickamauga kept, even though she was out there turncoat, the Chickamauga, they kept fighting the Europeans over time. Said she died around the time of 1822 to 1824. They don't know because, again, these settlers were not deep in the South like this. They don't know when she died. But we're just gonna use that story of Miss Nancy Ward to drive it home. A lot of the pain and suffering that our people endured in the so-called 20th century with Jim Crow, all the civil rights and all that stuff. I'm gonna show you stuff like what you just said, the stuff like the story I just told you about Nancy Ward. I want y'all to realize a lot of that stuff is self-inflicted. You know what I'm saying? Because you had the reason we got put in a messed up situation because so many of our people, unfortunately, over the years, did not want to stand on their square. They did not want to hold down the culture. They did not want to. They thought the grass was green on the other side. They thought being European was better and all that, and that all culminated into the Jim Crow and us being marginalized because every time y'all sat up there and tried to help the adversary, y'all always ended up getting played. You know what I'm saying? Literally every single time. So I really want just going forward, just doing analysis stuff like this. When you see your people getting beaten down with water hoses and all that stuff, all in the 60s, I want you to go back and just do the knowledge to what was going on in the 1800s and the 1700s, where a lot of our people were sitting up here switching sides. They were free doing their thing. They had high status in society when they were Muslims, but they chose to give all of that up and wanted to be European. And then they wanted to complain about racism and the Dred Scott decision and all that stuff because they wanted to be European. So now I want y'all to just really understand that a lot of our people had it. A lot of our people unfortunately had a lot of that shit coming. A lot of the bad racism and all the stuff we suffered in the so-called 1900s and even up to this day. We had a lot of that coming by switching sides and getting away from our lost culture. And all the blessings that was given to us as a people. You know what I'm saying? You're always going to get punished when you get off your square. You don't honor your ancestors. You know what I mean? So anyway. So, just doing it honest, man. I know I did. I hope y'all can hang, man. I don't know why I started doing all these dang old marathons, but it's just a lot of information. Again, the main thing we want to stress in this drop is that the Mississippian man will never have his power back until he wants to be a Moorish. Until he wants to re-adopt his Moorish demonstration. When you was a Moor in your demonstration, you inspired people to your cause. You know what I'm saying? That's what it is, because you were a vessel to Allah. You know what I'm saying? You were a spokesperson for Allah. That's the only way you're going to ever get it back as a Moorish Mississippian man. So anybody telling you anything else, again, they're just going to waste your time, and they're not really real men, because the only real path to manhood for a Moorish Mississippian Asiatic man is through Islam. You know what I'm saying? It's through Allah's culture. It's through the divine culture. You know what I'm saying? It just is what it is. So just doing the knowledge, man. Tapping in live from Reagan, Chickamauga, Alabama. I'll tap back in with y'all later. Peace.